I am a die-hard true crime fan, and for about 10-11 years I've had a bit of an obsession with documentaries about the Amish. I'm not 100% sure why, but I think it's probably because I'm a practicing minimalist, so I love watching these programs where people are just living such a pure, simple life. At least it's usually a pure life. Murder in Amish country certainly suggests that that's not always going to be the case, and I thought this just kind of covered so many areas that I loved, I had to watch it, and it is pretty good. I will say that, half the episodes are really interesting and half of them are quite mundane, but they are all involving murders. There are no, petty crimes or anything here. And the first episode is actually probably my favourite insofar as it's the most eye-opening. So I'm not going to spoil any of the cases here in too much detail. I don't want to ruin the outcomes or what happened or who the murderers were, because it's not always clear. Actually, there's another one that's my favourite as well, so I might talk a little bit about those two episodes, but not in any depth. But basically, if you are unaware to any great extent about the Amish, basically they live in quote-unquote Amish country in America, and there are different orders of Amish, but generally speaking, they don't use technology. They're not allowed to drive cars. Some of them are allowed to be a passenger in a car. In one of the stories, it explained that they weren't allowed to keep freezers in their home, but they were allowed to store their food in a freezer elsewhere that they pay, a monthly fee for or whatever. So it's actually quite educational in terms of learning facts about the Amish. If you've never seen a documentary about the Amish or, read about them, I wouldn't say it's a good beginner's guide. But if you're already familiar with them, you may still learn things in this, as I did. But obviously the main focus is the crimes that are being committed and how they're committed. But the first episode is, as I said, probably one of my favourites, and in this one, an Amish man kills somebody, won't go into any detail, and he hands himself over to the police. But by doing that, he's obviously, potentially going to go up for trial, will probably end up going to prison. Again, I won't divulge things. But he didn't really realise what would happen once he handed himself in and kind of said, look, I've committed this awful, heinous crime. He was completely unaware of prisons and what our punishment system was, the American judiciary system is actually like. And it was just so fascinating to think that he could live not that far away from, busy cities and not actually be aware of what happens to somebody when they commit murder. Obviously, he knew he'd be punished, but when you're being punished by, for example, the priest or whoever it is in the Amish country, obviously it's going to be very radically different to being imprisoned. And it was just such a fascinating perspective. After this, the episodes focus more on the events leading up to the murders rather than after the fact. They're mostly reenactments. Obviously, there is no CCTV footage, there are no crime scene photos. There was actually one photo, and I couldn't work out if it was a crime scene photo or a staged reenactment photo. But for the most part, given the very nature of the fact that they don't use technology very much, or that often, there isn't going to be any kind of CCTV footage or anything on which they can rely. But they do use reenactments. Not usually the biggest fan of reenactments, and in this series they're fine. They're not too cringy and too cheesy, and obviously because they can't have actual footage, I completely respect their decision to do that. But at the same time, it wasn't 100% necessary. It didn't detract from the interesting anecdotes, but I don't feel like it really added anything. But again, if you're not that familiar with the Amish, maybe the visual reenactments would actually help you to kind of picture what was being said. So I guess it could appeal to some people. It's not too graphic. That one picture that I said I wasn't 100% sure if it was a reenactment photo or a crime scene photo involved a ligature around the neck, and that's about as gruesome as it got, to be honest. The cases are quite varied. You can kind of suspect that they're all basically going to be familial crime. There was a crime involving a young child. That one was also one of my favourites because it was so mysterious. You know, most of the cases are like, well, this person killed this person and you can kind of tell why. But with this one, it was just so mind-boggling. The other really interesting one actually involves, what was it? It's the individual who has a workshop, and he's in his workshop all day, every day, and he's inhaling, obviously, these fumes, and the fumes really negatively affect his mental health. That episode was really fascinating, and I wasn't sure where it was going. So in all, the anecdotes are actually really interesting. There's a really good mix of cases here, and it does feel quite different to the average true crime documentary, for very obvious reasons. If you have a penchant for documentaries about the Amish or Amish country or whatever, I think you're going to really enjoy this. I watched it on Now TV. I believe it might also be on somewhere else as well, but I watched it on Now TV, and I really adored it. Obviously it's a lot slower than the average crime documentary, so I kind of never watched more than one episode back to back, which is unusual for me. But certainly if they do another series of this, I'll be very happy to watch it. I don't know if there are any books about this kind of thing, but I'd be really interested to read more into this. If you have any recommendations, please let me know. But Murder in the Amish Country is as fascinating as it sounds, and I do think you'll love it.